Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. It's good to be with you here at OC Talk Radio, and I want to give a welcome to all our listeners to the next chapter with Charlie and introduce my special guest, mindset coach Peter Ashworth. Peter is a 30-year veteran of creating companies and organizations. He is highly inspired every day to help others. He is currently the CEO and founder of Live Possible Fearless Life, an organization that helps people live their life at their greatest potential. Did you know, this was really curious to me, did you know that anxiety disorders affect the lives of 20% of people in America, 1 in 5? Peter Ashworth's Fearless Life program is a new science-based guided approach to killing anxiety. Fearless Life incorporates the amazing new breakthrough science of neuroplasticity, which will be the focus of our discussion today, as long as I can continue to say the word. I had one hell of a time spelling it as I was going on with it. So let's. I'd like to just get right to it and get Peter on the mic so he can explain to us the wonders of neuroplasticity and how it impacts your personal life design and strategies and how you might use them to create your next chapter. Peter, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Hi, Charlie. Thanks for having me over.
I'm glad to have you here. We've spent a few hours together already, and I can't wait to talk about this fascinating subject, which I must admit I am just barely grappling with. You are a mindset coach, and I love that term, mindset coach. It's a different type of coaching, and it really fits well with your use of neuroplasticity in your coaching process. So why don't we start from the beginning? I'm reasonably sure that most of our listeners have never heard of neuroplasticity. So what can you tell us about what neuroplasticity is?
Neuroplasticity is the physiology of the brain, and that in itself is a bit of a enigma. Most people think of the brain as this thing that sits in the middle of our skull, weighs about 3 pounds. We have it for our whole life, and it kind of operates everything, but we don't really think about much deeper than that. Sure, we can read, we can watch movies, we can interact, we can communicate and do all the things we need to, but medical science is typically more focused on the physiology of your heart, your lungs, your knees, your whatever systems. But the science of the brain, the physiology of the brain, is a relatively new science. Neuro means brain. Plasticity means flexible and plastic. So that kind of describes what neuroplasticity is. It's the ability of the brain to reform itself like plastic can.
And that's sort of opposite of the way we believe. We believe our brain is sort of set, and we are set in our ways, and we're set in our brain, and we're stuck with whatever we have. And you're saying it's quite different than that.
For about the last 300 to 400 years of modern medicine, we've thought of the brain as pretty much set. You're born with a brain, you're intelligent, or maybe not so much. You have propensities or whatever. But you can basically reframe your thinking, your ability to deal with things, your mindset, your anxiety, and even medical cures can come through your brain. Placebo is a great example of that, is the number of people who are cured by a placebo, which is really a brain issue versus a physiology issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the brain is really a piece of physiology, and that's what people are now working out. It's not this magical thing that somehow things happen in. It's actually a physiological set of processes that involves electricity, chemicals, and a physical structure. So that's just like the rest of our body, really.
I was, as I was reading on on neuroplasticity. One of the things that it talked about a lot was the use of practice, that you practice these behaviors that you want to incorporate in your life. Instead of practicing the negative behaviors, you practice the positive behaviors. How does this different than positive thinking or just plain old practice? How would you explain that difference?
Well, positive thinking, if you think about that, started in the 50s, it moved through the 60s, the flower child era, and then into the 70s when positive thinking was a way to make life better. So I want to go on record that you can be the person you want to be by just changing your perception of what you want to be and being that person. But that was a fairly vague and general concept through the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s maybe. Neuroplasticity is actually the science of actually making physical changes to your brain as opposed to just having a positive outlook on things. But we come to find out most recently that thinking positively actually changes your brain, the physiology. So let me back up a little bit. So our brain is made up of neurons and connections, basically. It's a big globby gray mass up there. But if you look at it from a microscopic perspective, it's got 86 billion neurons in it. And each neuron is connected using what are called neural pathways and synapses, which connect them together. And so each of them has anything from 10 to 15 different synapses. So there's over a trillion different potential paths that any single thought can follow. So if you think about that, our brain is amazingly complex, but amazingly adapted to work. So at any particular moment, we're tracking thousands and thousands of pieces of data in our mind, and we're tracking the rotation of the Earth, the light, the sound. You're tracking back to past experiences. You're forecasting forward on potential outcomes. You're making decisions on all of this stuff that may be just presented to you, or you're maybe relating back to multiple, maybe in the hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of possible scenarios that you experienced in life, and you're choosing the scenario that best fits that moment. And you're doing this millisecond by millisecond, and that's the incredible complexity of our brain.
So how do we impact that? What do we do? What do we do differently as individuals to impact the synapses and the pathway that our thoughts may be going neurologically? Is that such a word as neurologically?
Yes, it is. The whole science of neuroplasticity and the brain, for that matter, is incredibly complex. So I want to try to keep it as simple as possible so people listening, they kind of can track with things that they can relate to. The first most important thing to understand about your brain is that only 10% of your thoughts are conscious. The other 90% are subconscious. So even though we think we're forming, things, 90% of every thought we have is subconscious. You have about 11 million thoughts or experiences in your subconscious brain every second. There's that much data going in there that you're tracking.
11 million thoughts per second?
11 million pieces of data that your subconscious brain is analyzing per second. And it's distance, it's sight, sounds. A lot of it is visual. It's relating to shapes and colors and movement and all these kind of things. It's incredibly complex. Per second that's happening, right? We've got about 140 conscious thoughts per second that we can track. So 140 thoughts, 11 million pieces of data coming in through your subconscious. Your brain is working, 365 days of the year, 60 minutes per hour, 60 seconds per minute. It's just never turns off. It goes into subconscious mode during sleep, and it goes into more conscious mode when you're awake. But just thinking about that alone, 90% of all your thoughts, even during waking times, are subconscious. So it's an amazingly advanced piece of machinery is our brain. A single brain is more powerful than any computer on the planet, by far. So the brain is an amazing tool for us.
Can we, if we have 140 thoughts per second as opposed to 11 million pieces of data, can we impact our subconscious, or can we only impact conscious, ourselves? Can we only impact our conscious thinking? Or is there a way to impact our unconscious thinking?
It's the big question, Charlie. How do you make change happen, right? Because all of us are born, and the day we come out of our mother's womb, we come into the world. Part of it is DNA, so we're already kind of wired. The best scientists predict that around about 20% of our thinking is DNA hardwired.
And there's no changing that.
Well, the good news is you can change 80% of it. That's right. So it used to be thought that our brain was just this thing, that it is what it is, right? You read more books, you became smarter and more knowledgeable. Our EQ, our IQ was minimally changed throughout our life. We were as intelligent as some people said we were. You can actually magnificently change your intelligence. You can change your EQ in using physiology with that. So, and the big deal is what we call epigenetics, which is the science of DNA through kind of our physical structure, our RNA, our DNA, all of that kind of stuff. So, the amazing thing about, and this will blow you away, the amazing thing about neuroplasticity and physical changes, you can actually change the DNA, which will will actually physically change the DNA that future generations will think differently than you do right now. And that is mind-blowing.
And what is the process of doing that?
It changes the RNA and the DNA in your cells, basically.
But what do I need to do to change that?
Okay, yeah. So there's two elements there. I know this is ridiculously complex, and a lot of people are going to be like, I don't know what that is.
First, we'll bring it down to everyday level.
Yeah. So you have neurons, and you have synapses, and you have neural pathways, and you have billions of them going through your brain. Your brain is divided into multiple parts. You have 3 major parts, and then you have about 30 different parts of your brain that serve different functions. So these neural pathways, as electrochemical energy flows through the different neural pathways, it moves through different pathways in your brain. So you have areas of your brain that are specializing in movement. You have areas of your brain that specialize in logic. You have areas of your brain that specialize in things like music or running or fine motor skills or major motor skills. There's so many different parts. So our brain has got really good at whatever it is you're needing to do. It tracks through that part of the brain that influences it. So one of the biggest issues with neuroplasticity is anxiety and fear-based thinking. And it is an epidemic, as you mentioned earlier on, happening in the world. The fastest growing group of people that are experiencing chronic anxiety are people aged 8 to 19 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's the fastest by far in the.
Is that recent? That's a recent phenomenon. That has not been historical.
It's the last 3 to 5 years. It has become a epidemic of major proportions.
Is this of the high expectations of children that going to ADP classes and going to kindergarten that's going to get them in the right university, and parents wanting perfect children? Is that a result of that? It
definitely has a large component of it. It's like most big complex issues to solve. It's not one thing, it's multiple things. And so it's a combination of helicopter parenting, as you just mentioned, that don't allow their kids to experience some of the normal things. An example for you might be you're out at 11 p.m. in a ballpark hitting a baseball, and your mom's home worrying about you. But instead of her coming down and saying, never do that again, she goes, hey, can you be home a little earlier next time? The first scenario is you become worried and fearful that your mom's not happy with you, which manifested into all these other things. The second part of it is huge expectations by parents, family, friends that you are going to be a neuroscientist, or you're going to be a quantum physicist, or you're going to win the Nobel Prize, or you're going to play for the San Diego Padres one day, or you're going to do something major, with your life. And that kid, even though they can't relate to it, is feeling pressure already. The third thing is colleges and universities. Which school am I going to go to? Where am I going to go? Fourth would be social media. You're looking at everything you see online is great and wonderful. Nobody posts pictures of themselves looking depressed or tired or exhausted, or they don't post their rejection, letters from Stanford, Harvard, Cambridge, or even, North State, whatever university. They only post good stuff. So people have this anxiety that they're not keeping up with it. And then it's just kind of like kid stuff, looking around, like, hey, I don't have the nice Nikes like that kid, or the nice BMW, or the whatever. So these pressures build up in their mind, but what it really is neuroplasticity working. So you're starting to push realities of thoughts and experiences into the negative parts of your mind, and you start to see the world as more negative and more fearful and more worrisome. So we can change that too.
So what you're saying is, or suggesting, or saying that our brains are malleable, and that we can adjust the way we think and the way we respond to various circumstances based on information or thinking or practices. We can make, it is malleable, and we can make changes to our brain.
Yes, exactly. We can do it in any particular sphere that we want. Now, there's a slight DNA component of that 20% that says you have a propensity for something more so than somebody else. But I'll use an example of, let's say, a juggler at a circus. Let's say a young man, age 5, decides he goes to the circus one day when he's 5 years old, and he sees a guy that can juggle like 20, whatever those things are, those cones or whatever.
Right.
And he goes, that's what I want.
Bowling pins.
Bowling pins, yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes, that's what I want to do in my life. I want to wear a beautiful red jacket with gold tassels, and I want to go out and entertain the crowds by being the world's most amazing juggler. That guy at age 5 doesn't know how to juggle. Now, fast forward after he practices 8 hours a day religiously for 10, 15 years, gets better and better and better at it, he's going to be the world's #1 juggler eventually. And people are going to look at him and go, that guy is an amazing juggler. But he didn't start out that way. Neuroplasticity, there's no such thing as practice in terms of forming the brain. It's the brain's ability to do something over and over and over again that changes the physical structure of the brain to make somebody become a great juggler. And that's really what it comes down to.
How is that different than practice? I don't quite.
That's what practice really is. At the end of the day, is a physiology of a catcher or a pitcher or a batter. It's just doing it over and over again. The brain focuses itself down to be able to see the ball in slow motion. It gives it the ability to bring in more neurons to do particular tasks. It develops fine motor skills. It understands, and you know this as well as anyone, the rejection and the mental challenges of going from being a guy that likes baseball to being the #1 catcher in baseball, the mental stresses of that. So that hones the brain, it works the brain, and it allows it to be able to do that. And that's all a plastic situation of changing neurons and pathways, ultimately.
Again, I want to ask, for our listeners' sake and for my sake, what sorts of processes do we do to change that plasticity, that malleability of the brain, what sorts of actions do I need to take physically or mentally in order to adjust the brain to get it to where I want it to be?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, and it's why many people never achieve the goals they want. The first thing to remember, Charlie, is that the human brain is programmed for survival. It's built for survival. It's lasted millions of years, and we've continued to evolve on that. But our number one default on the brain is survival. So you have to keep that in mind, that as somebody's throwing you 100-mile-an-hour fastballs, your first instinct as you start that would be, I can't do this. That ball's too fast, too hard, and it's too quick. So your brain is going to reject that. It's going to push it away. It's the same thing when you develop anxiety, or you develop worry about things, or you look at things as unachievable. It's that brain saying, I can't do this, etc. Or if you take it back to the most basic, it's fight or flight. I'm either going to leave this alone. It's too complex. I don't want to deal with it. I want to leave, or I want to stand there and just try to achieve something. So you got to deal with that. The next part of your question is really important. You can change the way you think. So if you think about the way people think, you may be fearful, or you may be overconfident, or you may be extremely analytical, or extremely adventurous, or whatever that is. You can actually change your brain, plus or minus 20%, which is DNA, to be able to think the way you want if you're prepared to put as much time into it. So to answer your question, whatever you decide to do deep in your mind that you're passionate about, and you go out and practice it over and over and over again every day, you will begin to take the steps to begin to change the physiology of the brain, which will rewire those pathways from little tiny thin paths to be thicker and thicker and thicker until those neural pathways are big muscles. Think of it like going to the gym. The more you use a muscle, the bigger it gets, right?
Yeah, I tell you what I want to do. I'd like to do an experiment with you. I hope you're ready for this, because I'm throwing this at you unprepared. And that I have anxiety issues. I've had them for not, I've had them maybe 20 years, but severely. They're not as bad as they used to be, but they once were debilitating. They kept me from doing my job as an executive coach. On my way to my client, I would have a panic attack. And I would have clients that loved me. They loved everything that I brought to them. So I wasn't going into a negative environment. I was going into a very positive environment, and yet I had anxiety. And so what I'm going to ask you to do after our break is I'm going to ask you to walk me through what do I need to do to compensate for my anxiety, which is not as strong as it once was, but it's still there. Do you think that's something you could walk me through?
Absolutely. I'll give it my best shot, Charlie.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back at that. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And I have my special guest, neuroplasticity expert, Peter Ashworth, who uses neuroplasticity in his mindset coaching. And we are going to do a process of which I have a bit of an issue with anxiety, and Peter is going to work with me to totally remove my anxiety issues in 10 minutes. But before we do that, I have to agree with you that our brain is has this plasticity to it, and I use malleability to it, that is malleable. And I have probably in the last 2 to 3 years moved to a point of where, I've always been very curious, and I've always been very open to new ideas, but I am more open to new ideas than I ever was, and that was a conscious choice that I trained my brain to not judge ideas right away, but to accept them, evaluate them, take a look at them, compare them to my value system. Do they fit? Do they not fit? Sometimes I can do it in a matter of seconds, and right now I'm working through a major issue in the Bible that the Eastern Orthodox Christianity believes one thing about, well, I could just say it exactly, it believes one thing about what happened at the cross and resurrection, while the West believes a totally different thing. And I have the presupposition of the West. And so it's hard for me to grasp what they're saying in the East, except I like what they're saying. I just can't justify it. But so now I've purchased 3 books, and I'm reading with an open mind to try to understand these differences in theology. So I am prepared to think differently, and I'm curious how you can. I just use that as an example to see how you can help me with anxiety.
Okay, so I don't claim that I can cure your anxiety in 10 minutes, but I will see if we can move the needle just a little bit. One of the great things, and I know you're a coach as well, one of the great things about coaching is it's not like therapy where you go back to childhood and try to work your way through issues and perceptions and things that are gained through that. Coaching uses the client's thinking to come up with an understanding of why they think a certain way and why they should change that thinking.
Great explanation.
Yeah. So you mentioned values just a moment ago. So are you able to tell me your top 5 values in life?
My top 5 values.
Yeah, and if you can't think of them, just give me the ones that come to mind to start. So
Sure. Kindness, which would fit very closely with empathy. I have a value for understanding other people's point of view, that I can be wrong. That's a strong value with me, that I can be wrong. And then I have my normal values of family, that family is incredibly important to me. My wife and my son are probably fit as the number one components of my life. Does that help?
That's 4. Give me one more.
Give you one more. That's 4.
Just big things that come to mind: love, passion, doing good for others, money, finance, roof over your head, safety.
No, it's mine is so other-centered. It is helping other people.
Helping others.
I used to say my number one value, my number one goal in life was to help people feel better about themselves.
Charlie, you've just listed your top 5 values. It was a bit impromptu, so probably if you put more thought into it, they may change slightly. But you've given me a pretty good understanding about who you are as a person. And
That's scary.
Well, it doesn't take long. And what you value in life. So I'm going to read them back to you. Your number 1 value was kindness. To me, that means, and you mentioned your number 2 is empathy, so they're very closely related.
Right, exactly.
You like to be considered a kind person, you like to be a kind person, and you like to exude kindness, which is closely related to love and those kind of things in the world. So,
right. To me, kindness is kindness is an action word for love, because love is a 25-cent word that means so much, and kindness is the action word for love.
Yeah, and we can, we mentioned in the first half, you can choose to be who you want to be in life just by your thinking. So you can choose to be kind to somebody, or you can choose to judge that person. I look at those as opposites. Judgment is like taking a bias and applying it to somebody. Kindness is really looking at that person and feeling empathy, which is your number 2, and saying, how can I help that person, or I feel bad for that person, or how can I make a difference in that person's life?
Okay.
And being open. Number 3, with other perspectives. So you can see those are kind of related together, right? If you think about that. You like to have a global perspective on the world, see other perspectives, gather the data, and really then make a decision on what you believe or who you want to be. 4th is family, which is that has stood the test of time, and pretty much every family, plus or minus a few crazy ones, the television shows Dallas and shows like that where the family's busy fighting and whatever, reality shows and things like that. But typically most people in the world look at their family as the closest people to them. There's there's something that's not logical about the extreme love that you would stand in front of a speeding car so your child wasn't killed, or you would do anything for your wife or your husband to make them have a better day, or whatever that takes. An incredible sacrifice, and it's kind of unquantifiable in a way, the amount of love that you feel for your family, more so than pretty much most other things in the world. And your 5th one is helping others, and so that's kind of shows who you are. So kindness, empathy, other people's perspectives, family, and helping others are the lenses that you look at pretty much every major decision in your life. Now, it's not about what you want for breakfast; it's major decisions. Where are we going to live? What am I going to do with my life? How do I want to be? How do I want to show up? So it's really important that you clearly understand what your key values are, and then every thought you have, that again, major thoughts, or every action you take, you should run it by those lenses to be true to yourself. Otherwise, you're not being true to yourself. So I'll go out on a limb and say the most stressed people in the world are living outside their values. And it's pretty obvious. Their subconscious, 11 bits of information a second, tracking these values subconsciously, and yet you're making decisions that you action that fit outside those values. There's where anxiety comes from. That's where stress comes from. That's where looking yourself in the mirror and not seeing somebody that you like comes from. So that's where all of that comes from. So I'll put anxiety in a nutshell for you. There's 2 major thoughts in the world that that people have.
Right.
One is that things will work out somehow. I'm strong enough. I'm smart enough. I look at all my past situations. Somehow I've been able to put it together and make it work. The other side of that coin is like, I don't know if things are going to work out. I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm fearful. I don't think I can work it out. The world's a terrible place. It's fearful. We've got crazy political situations. We've got wars. We've got poverty. We've got famines. We may have nuclear. All of these things are fearful thoughts that you cannot control those. Those are the 2 sides of anxiety. One is that I think I can work it out, and one is I don't think I can work it out. So herein lies your thought process in life. So if you put every major thought you have around your values, kindness. Okay, so let's start with that one. Kindness is about you want to be a certain kind of person. So that's not a fearful trait. Empathy, other perspectives, family and helping others is really in the camp of I think I can work this all out. Things will work out. I think I can make this work. So I want to then take that and apply it to, because we're doing this in 10 minutes, I want to apply it to a major issue in your life. So let's use the lens of that. It's going to work out or it's not, and then the 5 values, and apply that to an issue in your life that you are prepared to talk about right now. What would that be?
Oh my goodness! There's a couple, but I don't want to go public with them. So
Well, just give me one that you're ruminating over or worrying about at the moment.
I'll tell you what happened to me. Now I don't know. This was certainly anxiety laden, but I don't know if it fits or not. But a friend of mine, well, he's a friend of mine. He's a player for the San Diego Padres, and he's an acquaintance more than a friend. But we'll shake hands, we'll sit in the corner and chat and BS. But we don't spend a lot of time together. But he 2 or 3 days ago beat the Dodgers by hitting a grand slam home run, walk-off home run. I was on the field for batting practice. I went to congratulate him, and all I was a handful of stuttering. I couldn't congratulate him. I couldn't find the words. It was stuttering. So there must be another value of how people perceive me. Do you think maybe
Well, you're talking about that you were a stuttering mess to him, and that's what you want to talk about now. Not his perspective, but your perspective, right?
Sure.
Okay. So, there's an obvious there.
There is.
What's the obvious that any psychologist would take you down that road?
That I didn't give a good impression of myself.
The obvious is that you don't feel worthy to be in his company and to congratulate him and tell him that's great. You just feel very nervous, and so you couldn't even put the words together. That's the obvious.
See, that's so obvious that I can't see it. But
Yeah.
that's exactly true.
Yeah. So let's run that through your values. Can we do that?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't see how they fit, so I'm really curious how this is going to work.
Kindness. Tell me about kindness relevant to that situation from your perspective. So you walk out on the field, it's batting practice, and you want to congratulate this guy. Is that the scenario?
Yes. And the kindness is he had been struggling, and this was kind of his opening to getting out of a struggle, and it was huge. I mean, you hit a walk-off home run to win a game, and it's huge. And I wanted him to feel, as I said, to feel better about themselves. I wanted him to feel better about himself, and I wanted to give those words of encouragement to him.
Okay, so there's kindness to him, and is there kindness to you? Can you be kind to yourself?
Can I be kind to myself in that situation, or just in general?
Oh, just in general.
Yeah, I think I can.
Kindness is forgiveness. I mean, it has a lot of parts to it. It's forgiveness. It's love. It's like just acceptance. It's all of that stuff.
I for the most part I can, but I think you're right. It is a driver toward anxiety. It's when I don't is when I become anxious.
So if let's say that your want is to be kind to him and say, "Attaboy, good job." That's a gesture of kindness to make him feel good. Kindness to yourself is saying, "I'm worthy. I'm
worthy of giving you kindness."
Yeah, I like myself. I'm a kind person. Those exact same attributes apply to that situation. That like I'm lucky. I'm here on the field. I'm a good person. I have got all that kind of stuff going on. And, it applies to empathy. So all of these things apply to you, too. If it's a value, you have to apply it to yourself as well as to the outside world.
See, I've only looked at it the opposite way. I've only looked at my values, how they impact other people, not how they impact me.
Yeah, well, empathy is a great example. Give yourself a break. See your perspective and say, hey, he's trying. I'm trying. I'm doing my best in this situation to to, why should I beat myself up? Because if you give empathy to others, you have to be able to give it to yourself. Sorry, my phone is going crazy here. Other perspectives, you can look at all kinds of perspectives. You could look at your perspective. You can look at his perspective. You can look at perspectives of the world. You can look at this thing a lot of different ways. But you have to do the work. Because we can sit here in this studio with, this beautiful equipment on this beautiful California day, and we can spend 10 minutes, and then you can walk out the door, and you can never put another thought into it again. But if you really want to kind of get past that stammering, stuttering mess of a guy out on the field, you got to start to think about how to do that.
And that has happened to me of late in this anxiety cycle that I've fallen into, that I have medication for, and if I don't take my medication, I will be stuttering. I could be stuttering on this podcast if I didn't have my medication, and it's just, and I think it's a lack of confidence.
Well, it's subconscious. Your 11 bits of information a second are going furiously while you're conscious. You're saying to yourself, I don't want to stutter. I just want to do this well. I want to be confident. Your little tiny bits of information a second and your conscious are way outmatched by your subconscious. So going back to neuroplasticity, it's the ability to say, I don't want to be that. And your 5 values, you got to keep those near and dear to your heart. And then what you want to do is make sure you're crystal clear on that and put every challenging scenario in life through that lens, both to yourself and to others. You will find you'll have a lot less anxiety going on in the world.
That is the first time I have heard of applying my values. I know they're for myself. My values are me, and that I want to be kindness and all that, but it's not that I'm kind to myself, that I'm empathetic to myself, that I am, non-judgmental of myself, because I don't always feel that. That's a quite interesting thought. So that would be your suggestion for our listeners, is to, one, create a list of values of what's really most important to you, and you certainly don't want to do that in the 2 or 3 minutes that we did. You want to spend some time at that. And then evaluate your actions with regard to, are you expressing those values to other people, and are you taking them in for yourself, that those values are also self-incorporated.
Correct, yeah. You can't have 2 different perspectives. Kindness can't be something you push out but you don't have internally. It has to be your whole being, your whole person, in all elements. That's what it has to be. Same with empathy, same with family. You've got to love other families. You've got to love your family. You've got to love yourself. You're part of family. It has to apply across the board.
So is neuroplasticity, is it very correlated with values, or are there other things that we can...
Well, neuroplasticity is a physical manifestation of the way you think. So if you keep these values close to you, the more you think about something, the more plastic your brain becomes in that area. So as you get into them and you start to really dig deep into what your values are, and as you think about them more, and as you begin to apply them, like all of this is difficult at first because it's not comfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's not the normal way you process information. But if I'm talking about big decisions again, any big decision you have, like why was I a blithering mess with this guy, is a big decision. You don't want to be that.
Yeah, it was embarrassing.
But just you apply your values to that after the fact and analyze it in your brain, and then start running that scenario through your brain. Neuroplasticity happens within 4 days. It begins to make changes, physical changes within 4 days. Starts with a few thoughts and then more and more. And the more you think about something, the more hardwired it becomes. You've heard the word hardwiring before.
Yes, of course.
That applies to neuroplasticity. It's basically what it is. So you're hardwiring the way you want to think versus the knee-jerk way your brain has just organized itself over a life of experiences.
So once again, I come back to positive thinking is laden with so much garbage, but if we're thinking in that positive way about ourselves, that this is a way we want to behave, as I think, thus I am. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can change anything. Again, if you want to be a juggler, you just have to start practicing it. You may have never juggled anything in your life before, and you become a master juggler. It takes a long time, or an Olympian, or a Major League Baseball player, or whatever. That's all neuroplasticity. It is the most important element of our lives that nobody understands well enough and nobody puts any time into. So if you've decided that your moment out on the batting field, congratulating the player, and the inability to communicate effectively is important to you, then all you've got to do is start thinking of, your values, applying those to yourself, rehearsing that in your mind. That could then move into speeches, other relationships, even personal relationships you feel more confident with.
Yeah, see, that's important to me because we've talked about becoming a ball player, a juggler, or something that's big and amazing. But I think I like the idea of neuroplasticity just in everyday life, just in the way I communicate with other people, the way I get along with other people, and if I can train my brain to not be judgmental, to be open, to be kind, to be collaborative, those are all important aspects to me rather than, I think they're the heartbeat of control. I mean, I think that's where leaders come from. And I think too often leaders feel exactly the opposite, that they have to be the ones that are right rather than the ones that need to be more collaborative and working with people. And I think it seems to me that neuroplasticity can really help us in those everyday matters, how I treat my wife, how I treat my son.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'd say is we don't always have to have the answers. Sometimes we struggle for the right answer. Sometimes we will never work it out, and other times the answer is not really important. It's the journey. So, that takes a little pressure off us.
Okay, well, Peter, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this, and I especially like the two-way application of the neuroplasticity. That it's just not the way I respond to others, but the way I treat myself.
That's your values, yeah. It's values apply to you as much as anything, which is the way to get your values applied to everything is using the process of neuroplasticity.
Yeah, and if I apply those to myself, then they will naturally apply to others.
Correct.
Because Jesus said the most ignored phrase in the world, when asked what is the most important thing, he says, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, and exactly. We always forget as yourself. And so if you are not loving yourself, the implication is you really cannot love your neighbor.
Leading to anxiety.
Leading to anxiety. Peter, thank you so much for being my guest today. And I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. Peter, I will have your contact information on the show notes.
Yes.
So people can get a hold of you if they want to find out more about neuroplasticity.
Absolutely.
And how they can impact their life as if you have time in your life to do that right now. but I'm sure that you'll be able to help plenty of people.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to work with Peter. He's been a great friend and a great asset for me personally. And so until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.